Well, it's very difficult to talk about all the things that
Is it on?
one associates Manik with. But if I had to sum up Manik's approach to work, I think the phrase that most appropriately describes it would be seek truth from facts. And that is something that he really believed in, and he did it with such conviction, he did it with such sincerity, he did it with such passion that it was really inspiring to see, and it's something that he kept up with right till the end of his life. Even through a period of sort of considerable sickness and all kinds of problems, you went to him, he was looking at data. He was sitting in front of his computer, he was looking at data. There's nothing that he had missed. If NSSO had released a new round of PLFS, he knew what it was about. And, right till his last day, that's what he was doing. So, that's the kind of passion and commitment with which he did his work. And that was, I believe, quite remarkable. His contributions to teaching, to research, to policy making are really very vast. In fact, so vast that it's very difficult for any of us to summarize it all. But he was, for example, in CESP, perhaps the teacher who still holds the record for having taught the largest number of courses. He had practically taught every core course. So that's the kind of sort of competence he had, that if you didn't have a teacher for maths, you could ask Manik to teach. If you didn't have a teacher for microeconomics, you could ask him to teach. If you didn't have a teacher for macro, you could ask him to teach, and so on and so forth. So he could actually be asked to teach any course that you needed to be taught, and he would do it with great competence. And he also was so committed to it, as Professor Patnaik said. He kept teaching right through the period when he was full-time engaged in policy making at such high level that he was obviously very busy. So whether he was chairperson CSEP or member planning commission, he could be actually allotted a full course. He would make sure that at 9 o'clock in the morning he will take his class before he goes to the planning commission. He taught full courses through that period. So that was quite incredible. His commitment to his students, in fact not just to his students, to any student, was quite remarkable. I was never his student. I was not a student even of JNU. I had come to JNU for a visit, and you basically could just sort of go to him and seek his advice, and he was there. So that was the kind of commitment he had to teaching, to students. But it's engagement with the work, the research he did with data. Some of it has been absolutely not only seminal, actually inspiring. I remember listening to a presentation. I was not a student of JNU. In '99, in a conference, listening to a presentation by Abhijit Sen of work that he and Himanshu had done together on 61st round of NSS 99 was 61st? 55th round of NSS Survey, which was 1999-2000, which was almost a decade after the economic reforms, after a decade of economic reforms, a period that was marked with incredible level of hardship. It was a period of deep agrarian crisis, huge intensification of distress and poverty in the country. And here comes out an NSS survey which shows a steep decline in poverty. And Abhijit Sen and Himanshu come up with this paper where they show how NSS had actually manipulated the survey, that they'd actually done pilot surveys to test out what happens if they change the reference period for which the consumption data are collected has come out of that paper that Manik and Himanshu had done together. So, that's the kind of scholarship. In fact, I remember listening to that lecture, and I was a PhD student, and thinking that, oh wow, this is how data have to be analyzed. So, that's the kind of inspiring scholarship that Manik represented. Also in policy making, it's, very often, people talk about his big contributions, his sort of consistent support for universal public distribution system. But it's actually interesting how Manik, through this very long period of being part of policy making at a very high level, was actually associated with a very large number of things. And some of them have had very profound sort of impact on how things happen in India. Professor Patnaik talked about the long-term food grain policy, the high-level committee on long-term food grain policy. That committee proposed a new system of public procurement through what has come to be known as a scheme for decentralized procurement, where central government gives money to state governments to do the procurement of food grain rather than Food Corporation of India doing all the procurement. I'm sure many of you know that Food Corporation of India's procurement is concentrated in just a few states, in Haryana and Punjab and a few other states. And a large part of the country was out of it. And Professor Sen chaired that committee, which proposed that instead of getting FCI to do procurement across the country, which will never happen, government should give money to states to build capacity for doing their own procurement and using the grain that they procure for running public distribution system in those states. That's what the period of 2000s was a period that saw a significant recovery of public procurement, public distribution, and agricultural growth in several states, including states like Chhattisgarh, which was based on precisely this. It's only because of decentralized procurement system that this huge transformation of public procurement and public distribution took place in many of these states. In fact, this is still one of those big things that a lot of people know about, but there are many other things that actually very few people knew about. I remember having this conversation with Manik once, and Manik was telling me about how India was unique in the way, in being the only major country which did not have raw material for production of fertilizer, but was not dependent on multinationals of the first world for supply of its fertilizers. And how India, during the period of planned economic development, had created the capacity for fertilizer production, and they had done so in a very interesting way, which was that, so India doesn't have phosphate rock, and importing phosphate rock would be just too expensive. So what IFCO and the major fertilizer sort of apex institutions of which sort of worked on fertilizer policy did was to actually get countries which had phosphatic rock to produce phosphoric acid, which was imported by India, to convert it into DAP and superphosphate. And in the whole world, India is the only country which practically imports all the phosphoric acid that's produced in the world to produce its phosphatic fertilizer. India is the only country which does it. And because India is the only country which does it, world does not have a price for phosphoric acid. So how do you import it when you don't have a price? And it turned out that while this was a very smart idea, because of lack of a method of pricing, very often, before the sowing season, when the Indian demand for fertilizer picked up, Indian manufacturers of phosphatic fertilizer would be at a disadvantage because the suppliers of phosphoric acid would dictate absurd prices. So a committee was formed under chairpersonship of Professor Abhijit Sen to actually come up with a formula that will be used for pricing of phosphoric acid. And that's how world prices of phosphoric acid are determined. It's quite incredible how important some of these things have been in, and have had incredibly long-lasting influence on how some of these things happen. This required, I think, three things. One, a fantastic understanding of the facts, a fantastic understanding of what the data were showing you, and this is something that his capacity was absolutely unmatched. There was nobody like him. I mean, he was constantly at it. He knew what the data was saying, and he knew it with such rigor that he could beat anybody. The second thing was his commitment to welfare of people at large. That whatever you were going to do, you had to do it in a manner that would benefit people. It had to be something that would benefit people and not just, serve the state power or the capitalists. That the policies had to be changed in a progressive direction was something that he was deeply committed to. And the third thing was an understanding of how the state functions and the kind of institutions that you need to create that would survive, political changes, that would survive, that can be embedded in the way state functions and still deliver a progressive outcome. I think it was a combination of these three things that made Manik the rare academic administrator that he was, and I think that is something that I associate most with him. Finally, I would like to end by saying that Manik's commitment I would end by from where I started. His commitment to seek truth from facts was so deep that he would lose no opportunity to find the facts. The facts, wherever they came from, was something that he was interested in. Whether it was, an NSS survey coming out, whether a student had done fieldwork and come back and was sort of discussing his work with him, or whether it was, the guy who was selling him a cigarette, telling him what had been happening in the village he came from. So, knowledge from any source was something that he was not going to miss. He was interested in those facts. He had the capacity to process those facts. He had capacity to intelligibly process those facts and use it to inform the work he did as an academic and the work he did as a policymaker. Thank you.